Shabbat Shalom and greetings from Jerusalem, Jane. It's a cold day here in the Holy Land. It's raining. I just put on my scarf to try and get a little bit more warm. I want to give you this current news update. I don't know exactly how to describe what it's like to be in Israel after October 7. Except trauma. On October 7, all of these savages who broke into Israel, among all the people they kidnapped, was a 32-year-old lady. Her name was Shiri, and she was protecting her babies, 9-month-old Kefir and 3-year-old Ariel. We all saw the horrific video. She was carrying her precious red-headed babies, wrapped in a blanket, and she was pulled in to the Gaza Strip. I think baby Kefir, 9 months old, was probably the youngest hostage in world history. For 500 days, the whole world has been hearing the story about the Bibas family and saying, where is baby Kefir, his brother Ariel, his father Aden, and his mother Shiri? The whole family was kidnapped on October 7. The last 48 hours here in Israel has been horrific. Absolutely horrific. Hamas announced on Wednesday that out of the 4 deceased hostages that was going to be released on Thursday, the mother Bibas and the 2 precious babies were going to be released. They were on the list of casualties. When we came to the release, I spoke about that in a previous video, which was an absolute horror show and desecrations of these precious people who were brutally murdered in Gaza. When they were brought into Israel, it turned out that in the coffin that was supposed to hold the remains of Shiri Bibas, the mother of Ariel and Kefir, it was not her body. These remains belongs to whatever unidentified woman inside Gaza that Hamas, in their deplorable, demonic, evil warfare game, just pulled out of the rubble somewhere, took from a morgue and placed it in a coffin to torment the Bibas family and the rest of us here in Israel more than ever before. So the Forensic Institute had to give the message to the Bibas family: this is not the body of Shiri. There was an uproar and an outcry from the Holy Land and the rest of the world, and it came out in the media that Hamas was shocked about the uproar. Then before I went to sleep last night, it came out from the Israeli military that the 2 babies, Kefir and Ariel, who was brutally murdered in Gaza, they were strangled by terrorists inside the Gaza Strip. A 9-month-old baby and a 3-year-old boy were strangled with their bare hands. But naturally, they couldn't let that get out to the world, so they had to cover their crimes, their atrocious crimes. And they did unspeakable things to the bodies of these 2 precious babies in order to make their bodies look like they were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Did they cut them? Did they throw rocks at them? The details are too gruesome to be shared in public. Horrific mutilations of the bodies of these 2 precious babies who was brutally strangled to death. That's the Nazis we are dealing with inside Gaza. As I'm about to go to sleep last night, there's a message coming out on media that the savages in Gaza probably understood this is not so good. So in the shield of darkness, they apparently found the body of Shiri Bibas, which they knew the whole time where she was. They just had to inflict more trauma to the whole nation. So they called up the Red Cross last night and they said, we have a casket for you. We have the remains of Shiri Bibas. Get to this point. So that's what happened late last night. The Red Cross went and met with these savages. They received a coffin. They notified the IDF. They notified the Forensic Institute in Israel, which of course was closed at Shabbat. The team of that institute, they gathered to work. And late last night, after that coffin had been handed over to the Red Cross, from the Red Cross to the IDF and going through security sweep, it came to the Forensic Institute and they processed the body overnight. And this morning, the Bibas family finally got some confirmation that this was indeed the remains of Shiri Bibas. Because of Shabbat, there has not been an official statement from the Forensic Institute, but it came out in media here in Israel that it's estimated that she also dies in November 2023 together with her babies. We don't know the details, it didn't come out yet, if she was also strangled like her baby boys, and if they did unspeakable things to her body. So here are these savages who kidnapped a mother and her two babies into Gaza. We all saw the video. And now they have a mother who probably every second of the day was pleading for the life of herself and for her babies. I can't imagine the horror. And it probably became too much for these savages to have a crying mother and a crying 9-month-old baby and a crying 3-year-old. So after about a month, they strangled them to death and they mutilated their bodies in order to say the cause of death was an Israeli airstrike, which we know is a lie from forensic evidence. So now there's going to be a funeral here in Israel. Yarden Bibas is going to bury his wife and 2 toddlers. It is, wow, it's very, very difficult. So they have been dead since November 2023. While all of us have been saying, where is the Bibas children? What about the Bibas children? What about Kefir? We were like, okay, Kefir, it's his first birthday. Okay, it's his second birthday in captivity. But he was killed after 1 month with his mom and his older brother. So may their memories forever be a blessing. May they rest in peace. May God wrap his arm around that family and comfort them. So right now what is taking place, that 6 hostages has been alive. 6 alive hostages were just released inside the Gaza Strip. 2 of them, an Israeli Bedouin and another Israeli, actually by own free will, wandered off into Gaza nearly 11 years ago. One of them was in mental distress after the passing of his brother. So instead of Hamas just letting them go home, they kidnapped them and they have held them hostage inside Gaza for 11 years. The first one is already released in another deplorable spectacle, propaganda, horror show that we just saw live here on TV. And then the remaining 4 hostages were all kidnapped on the October 7 onslaught on Israel. So they are now on their way home to the Holy Land. They have all arrived in Israel and are meeting their families shortly. The Israeli Bedouin, in the last minute, Hamas decided we are not going to release him in this horror show out of respect for the Arabs in Israel. I mean, where was their respect when they kidnapped him in the first place? Out of respect for the Arabs, we are not going to put him through the horror shows that we are putting the rest through. So he's just going to be released quietly to the Red Cross. So that's again a testimony of how evil these monsters are inside Gaza. So 4 deceased hostages came home, 6 alive hostages came home today. Then Thursday next week, we are going to have 4 more deceased hostages coming home. And then the first stage of this ceasefire hostage deal is coming to an end. And as you know, they have barely started negotiation if there's going to be a second deal or a second stage of this deal. So it's very, very difficult. In one hand, you are so broken and grieved and traumatized from the 4 precious hostages that was brutally murdered in captivity. But then you are celebrating, and I started crying when I saw the families seeing their precious one coming home. And the last 3 hostages, we just saw all of them, 3 young men around 30 years old. When they walked on stage, and I was watching it on Israeli media, they couldn't even recognize them. They were like, who's this, who's this, who's this? Because they have lost so much weight. We can't imagine the horror that they have gone through for the last 505 days in Gaza. And let me end by saying this. To all the journalists around the world, to all the reporters around the world in Israel, also, no, Hamas are not freedom fighters. They are not militants. They are not gunmen. How dare you use that word of these modern day Nazis who entered into Israel, who breached into Israel and committed the worst massacre, war crimes and atrocities since the Second World War, who kidnapped the mother and her 2 babies and brutally murdered them in captivity, strangled them and mutilated their bodies. And you're sitting on TV and you're calling them fighters? Hamas fighters? Hamas soldiers? Hamas militants? How dare you? Come on now. So like I said, it's a very, very traumatic day here in Israel. My heart is crying with the Bibas family. So there's going to be a funeral. Let's see. I mean, all of Israel is going to come to a standstill. All of Israel is going to try and go to that funeral unless the family say, you know, stay away, it's a private affair. But of course, I will keep you updated about all of that. United, we stand with Israel. Bye.